Grim, did you want to go to the agenda? Thank you. We're going to start with the introductions, and then we will have Graham cover the February and March feature updates. And we'll move on to the feature presentation of Power BI governance and inventory and usage metrics by Jared. We will allot time for live Q&A and then any wrap-up questions. So sometimes we typically start with going around the room and sharing your name, the company or industry that you are working in or for, and then any recent Power BI challenge that you have come across. Now, you don't have to share if anybody would like to share. Now is your chance. You can unmute and go ahead.
I'll start. So Jared Brown, the VP of Data and Analytics at Talon. With a few of the folks on this call, we actually started this user group a few years back and have been meeting every couple months. So see a few new faces here. So definitely thanks for coming. In terms of what the goal of participating in this user group, for me, it was, keeping up with some of the new features, being able to kind of see what other folks are doing, encourage folks on my team and outside to present on this meeting when they're not sick. Today, I wasn't planning on presenting, but one of our folks wasn't available, so I'm stepping in.
And I can go next. Am I unmuted? I can't check at the moment.
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm Graham. I'm a consultant at Talon, and I've been working with Power BI for a couple years. And as Jared mentioned, we hold these, every few months, and I generally go through the monthly feature updates. So I'll be hopping into that after we're done with these introductions. Recently, been working on a bunch of different BI challenges and projects, and I'd say the newest one to me, at least, is connecting to data in Azure via API and collecting cost and usage metrics from Azure to display in a Power BI report. And it's just kind of a way to connect different Microsoft assets that I haven't used together before. So that's been interesting.
Any of the newcomers interested in a quick intro? Or anybody else?
I keep talking, but I'm on mute. I was going to say it looks like we don't have anyone else. So if you wanted to get started.
Sure. Yeah, I will just jump into the monthly feature updates. So today we will be going over feature updates from February and March. January also happened since our last meeting, but there are generally no feature updates from January. So kind of skip that month for updates. So in the month of February, we saw a few updates and a few rather exciting ones here. So starting off in the top left and under reporting, there's some new capabilities for mobile formatting within Power BI Desktop. I have a quick demo put together for after I'm done going through these slides. So we'll take a little bit more of a look in depth there afterwards. But essentially, they've given more control to report authors in showing and in controlling how reports are displayed in a mobile view. Previously, you could control kind of the layout of the more mobile screen, but you were limited to using the same formatting that you had in the desktop screen in the mobile view, which really kind of limited the control that you had over that mobile space. Something that a lot of people found themselves doing was putting visuals hidden behind other visuals so that you could use the hidden visual for mobile and the visual that was in front for desktop. And they've kind of eliminated the need for that somewhat, but again, we'll get a little bit more in depth in that in the demo a little bit later. They've also made some updates to sensitivity labels. This is kind of a recurring thing that we keep seeing incremental updates to. So for February, we added, or Microsoft added, downstream inheritance for sensitivity labels. So now if you apply a sensitivity label to some data source or data flow, any data sets that you make off of that and any reports that you make off of those data sets will inherit those same sensitivity labels. They also introduced the ability to apply default label policies for Power BI and mandatory label policies. So this would make it so that, say, you publish a report to the Power BI service, or you download a PBIX file. Now, before you can save that, Microsoft, or rather, the Power BI will prompt you with an option for setting a sensitivity label onto that data set or that Power BI file. So in this way, you can enforce that all data sets within the service have a sensitivity label, so you don't have anything unlabeled floating out there. The new format pane, which was introduced, I believe, in November, is now on by default. So if you were to go and download the newest Power BI desktop and start that up, you would immediately see the new format pane, which is, it appears when you click on a visual, and it allows you to change the formatting options for that visual. And they had made a number of improvements in the new format pane. They had improved the screen space. They've improved the grouping of visuals or of options for visuals, and just a kind of a large number of small improvements in that formatting pane. So now that previously was a preview feature that you had to enable in order to see. Now, as soon as you start Power BI, that's what you'll see. And then finally, for the multi-row card, which is a visual in Power BI that behaves much like a card, but allows you to put in a field, and it will show all of the values from the field rather than a single like measure value. So if you had like a field for colors and you put that into a multi-row card, instead of just seeing like an aggregated value, like a count of colors, it would show you all of the colors that exist. And then you can add additional values into that card to show all combinations that both of those fields can create. So the multi-row card has a few use cases, but they have improved its interactivity with other visuals so that it's kind of more in line with many of the other visuals, where now you can select rows within that multi-row card and have that interact with other visuals. And you can control click to select multiple rows and use that to, say, filter a bar chart or filter some measure calculating an aggregate value. So just kind of improved interactivity between visuals, specifically for the multi-row card. In the data preparation section, this is kind of the most exciting update in my eyes from February. The dynamic M query parameters now support SQL Server as well as a number of other data sources. And I kind of have an example of this illustrated below. This is from their documentation on the Microsoft blog. I wasn't able to put together a demo for this, but what this allows for is a direct connection to like SQL Server. You can actually have a parameter in the Power BI report that can be controlled through like a slicer or something similar, and have that actually change the query itself that is accessing the data from SQL. So if we look at the kind of bottom left here, I have a screenshot of the advanced editor from Power BI's Power Query Editor. And essentially what's going on here is we have a text string being defined. We don't really need to get in depth in how that is all happening. This is kind of advanced behind the scenes Power Query stuff. But the important thing to know here is that this blown up image here is defining a query where we have just a basic SQL statement, a select statement, and then there's a conditionally inserted where clause. So you can see kind of on that fourth line of the blown up image, it says else where color in, and then it's referencing the selected color parameter, which is defined further up. So this selected color parameter is a named parameter. Well, it's built off of a named parameter called color parameter, which is in Power BI and is selected in the parameter management options in Power BI. And users can go through a list of color values. And if they select, blue, then it will actually change this base query, which is accessing the SQL database by inputting the string blue into the where clause of the SQL statement. So this capability of actually changing the SQL query from Power BI is new in February, and they've applied this to a few other data sources. If you're interested in those, you can see that on the Power BI blog. But this just kind of gives more control over how you're accessing data in a direct connection or live connection scenario to SQL Server. And then finally in February, we have the changes to the service. So we have a few changes to Power BI goals. So both goals and deployment pipelines are kind of areas within the service that we see Microsoft constantly updating and adding incremental improvements to. In February, there were a few goals improvements. The first is that if you go into your workspace, which is the personal workspace that only you have access to, you can now add and manage Power BI goals in that workspace. And also all government clouds now have Power BI goals enabled. So before, I believe it was limited to just the commercial space, so app.powerbi. Now it's also available in app.powerbi.gov. There were a few improvements to deployment pipelines. I think that the main improvement that was listed on their blog for February was integration with Azure DevOps. And I think that the exact integration was you can now automate tasks within DevOps to deploy Power BI assets from a workspace. Again, if you're interested in details, all of the details are available on the Microsoft blog. And then the final improvement to the service is the ability to download .pbx files that were previously not possible to be downloaded. So I think this specific case was Power BI files that were created in Power BI Desktop off of data sets that were either very large or configured in some specific way where it was using a specific connector. They've made it so that you can now download those files back off of the service, but there still exists a limitation where if the report was actually authored in the Power BI service and never used Power BI Desktop, you still can't download the PBX file. I would imagine that that's something they are also looking to improve in the future. So those are the updates for February. As always, there are a number of additional updates that are not included here, which are kind of smaller updates or like specific connector updates that we don't really need to go over from a high-level view, but all of those are available on the Power BI blog. So moving over into the month of March, we have a few more changes. So starting off in the reporting section, that new format pane, which became the default in February, was put into general availability in March, which doesn't really change anything. It just means, or sorry, I should say, they plan to put it into general availability coming in May. So they were announcing that it's going to go into general availability. And all that means is that they're taking away the option to revert back to the old format pane. So currently, if you open Power BI, you'll see the new format pane, but if you really don't want to use it, you can go into the preview settings and disallow it, so basically revert it back to what it used to be. In May, you will no longer be able to do that. The new format pane will become just the format pane. The next section here, another rather exciting change and rather large one is the introduction of error bars to line charts in Power BI. So if you go into the visual formatting options in Power BI, there's a little button to go into the analytics options, and that can, traditionally you can use that to show like constant lines or like some kind of AI analysis of your data. They've added an option to that analysis section to add error bars. So I have two screenshots at the bottom of the slide here showing kind of what you can do with error bars. This is from their blog. I believe that this data is some sort of test relating to genes in people of various ages. So we can see that as age increases for carriers and non-carriers of this gene, we have an average value, which is shown in that solid line, but then we can see the range of expected results or the range of error, and we can see that for non-carriers that range is smaller than for carriers, and there are kind of a number of ways that you can format these error bars to make it intuitive based on the data that you have. So on the left side, we see kind of a shading option. On the right side, we see actual lines being used to illustrate those ranges. And there's additional options such as actual data points, tooltips, different conditional colors, all sorts of things like you'd expect out of any Power BI visual, you can now apply to error ranges. And this is something that you could kind of sort of put into your data previously by having a bunch of lines and then formatting them in specific ways. But this makes it much easier to display if your data has an error range and much more intuitive for users to see. You can see if you hover over a point and you have it set to show the actual lines, it'll now show you that upper and lower bound as an icon that you'd expect to see in like some error range. So I think this is a pretty exciting update, and while it's not really applicable to every bar chart or line chart, I should say, if you do have a line chart that should have an error range, it's really nice to have this available. There were a number of updates to the Azure Maps visual in March. So these updates were kind of meant to bring the Azure Maps visual in line with the filled map and the shape map visuals that are also available in Power BI. So the first change here was the addition of geocaching. So Azure Maps previously required a latitude and longitude value to go along with any set of data that you put into the visual. This has been changed to use the same geocaching that's available in filled maps, so you can give it something like a country or a state or a city, zip code, all of those things. You can create your own hierarchy to define locations in the Azure Maps. So this makes it much easier to, given some set of data, put that directly into a map without going into the back end and converting it to latitude, longitude, and spending all that time to get it to be able to display in an Azure map. The second thing that was changed about Azure Maps in March was the actual bubbles that the Azure map uses. So the Azure map, it creates bubbles on your map based on the magnitude of data values in locations. So you can now turn those bubbles into pie charts. So this kind of allows you to expand your data across an additional dimension. Whereas before we're looking at size of data by location, we can now see, size of data across some legend across locations. So it makes the Azure map much more flexible to displaying data that has multiple dimensions rather than just that kind of single dimension of size. There were a few additional sensitivity label updates in March. Trying to remember. I think that this was a relatively small update. I think they removed a limitation where you could not save a Power BI report that had a protected sensitivity label that was larger than 2 gigabytes. They removed that limitation, something that probably you won't encounter, but something to keep in mind. And then the final change under the reporting section was the multi-row card selection. So they announced that they were releasing this in February. It somehow didn't get included in their February update, so they released it again in March and apologized for the inconvenience. So same thing, but they've now actually released it, and I verified that you can now multi-row select within Power BI. Moving into the service section, we've got a few updates here, starting off with the dataset hub. So the dataset hub is what you see when you connect to data, and then you scroll through data sets that you might have used before or that might be available within your organization. There were a couple of improvements here. The first is the addition of a new tab of promoted data sets and certified data sets. I think the name of the tab is trusted organizational data sets or something along those lines. So previously, there's kind of a long list of data sets that includes all data sets that you have access to, as well as all data sets that are promoted or certified within your organization. There's now an additional tab that has exclusively those data sets that are promoted or certified as kind of meant to be the place to go to explore trusted data within your organization. Additionally, the dataset hub is now default sorted by the recency of accessing those data sets. So when you open that up, you will see at the top of the list the data sets that you've connected to most recently. Going down at the bottom of the list will be data sets you've never used before. So this makes it easier to reuse data sets that you've used for previous reports. The next bullet point here is, again, Power BI goals. A few additional enhancements were made here. The first is the goals were integrated to Microsoft Teams. So if you own goals in Power BI, you can now configure it so that when a goal is met or when some specific status of a goal is met, you will receive a notification in Teams, and there'll be a pop-up that will tell the goal owner that some specific defined status of that goal has been met. You can click on that notification and it will bring you to the Power BI service, to that page that shows that goals scorecard. And the second goal enhancement kind of goes in line with the next bullet point here, is the custom statuses. So they added some additional features for formatting the status and the scorecards of goals, and the ability to set your own custom status for goals. So it's no longer just I think there were 3 statuses. There's like in progress, met, and I don't think I've used goals very much, so I'm not sure what the old statuses were, but now you can set your own statuses for your own goals. And then finally, there's one last update under the other section here, and that is the ability to quickly create reports from SharePoint document libraries. So if you go to the, I think the root directory of a SharePoint directory, there's an option to create a dataset based on the metadata of all of the documents within that library. So you won't be able to see specific data that exists within those documents, but you'll be able to see things like the size of the files within that SharePoint library, or the frequency of access, metadata like that, so that you can analyze how SharePoint document libraries are being utilized. So that's going to do it for the February and March updates. As I mentioned, I have a very quick demo. Just want to show off a couple of these features. So as always, I have accessed publicly available data from the AdventureWorks data set here in Power BI Desktop. I've created a pretty simple report here with just a couple visuals on the screen. And the first thing that I want to show off is the new mobile formatting options. So here we have on the screen 3 visuals, and this visual here in the bottom right is kind of a very wide visual that has a lot of columns, which include the product and the segment with the profit values for each. So, useful bar chart to kind of break down what is bringing in profits. But if we go to a mobile version, this display is probably not going to work as well because the mobile screen is going to be horizontally much smaller. It'll have more vertical real estate. So let's go up here into view and click on the mobile layout. And you can see that the view has changed. We have this kind of phone screen showing us what the report's going to look like. And then over here, we have all of the visuals that were used on this page. So I've already dragged in that same chart that I was just discussing. And then we have these other 2 charts that if I wanted to, I could drag in onto this mobile phone screen. And I can resize and reorganize however I want. So this mobile layout is something that you've always had access to, but previously you were not able to change how these visuals looked. They had to look as they looked on the desktop layout. But now you can go in and you can change, how these visuals look and how they interact. So you can see that for this top visual, I've changed the color formatting so that rather than the gray background, it's using a black background, and we can see the text is in white and the colors are slightly different. But still, we have the problem that I brought up of, looks like it's not going to let me scroll actually, but I can't see all of the data. I would need to kind of scroll this if I wanted to look at all of the data points on phone screen. So this is a limitation that I did notice that you could solve by creating another visual that was a column chart. So if I go back here and I change this rather than a line and clustered column chart, if I just made this a horizontal or a vertically aligned chart, it might display better. But since that is technically another chart, I can't actually use that in the mobile layout. So just a limitation to keep in mind. You have a lot more control over how the visuals are formatted, but you still don't have the ability to make new visuals or make changes to the actual values used in visuals that aren't already available in the desktop layout. So if I wanted to do that, I would still have to create a new visual and hide it somewhere on that desktop screen. And the next thing that I wanted to go over, actually the last thing that I have to demo here is just the multi-row card. So here I have another report page, and this one is displaying put together kind of a fun graph here that's showing the cumulative profit to date, and then another line will come up that shows the profit to date of this specific product, as well as an overlaid percentage that's showing for each of these points in time the percentage of the total profit that this combination of segment and product make up. So we can now kind of select these from the horizontal line chart, or sorry, the multi-row card. And you can see that as I select more and more, the percentage values are rising. So we can see that there are additional data points being added as I select these. And previously, you couldn't do this kind of selection, and you certainly couldn't do the control selecting that I'm doing here. But one limitation that I wanted to bring up here is that although that we now have this capability, we actually do not have the ability to control how it interacts. So the way that I would want this to interact with this pie chart here, which is a profit by country, is I would want it to, when I select something, I would want it to filter down this pie chart to only the values that correspond to the profits in this country. However, I can't tell it that I want it to filter. I can only tell it that I want it to highlight, which is the default behavior there. And if I go into Format, Edit Interactions, the buttons that would normally appear to control that interaction do not appear. If I click on pie chart, you can see these are the buttons that I'm looking for, the filter versus no interaction. Normally there would be another action or another button for highlight, but I actually can't see that. So they did not add the ability to edit, so you're kind of locked into whatever interaction Power BI gives you, which is, it's a slight limitation. Hopefully that's something that they do add back in the future. But still, the ability to use our multi-row card to kind of as a slicer to interact with the rest of the page is a new feature that I think will be useful in a number of ways.
Hey, Graham. You know how there's a setting in options that let you change the default behavior from highlight to filter? I wonder if it would honor it if you switch the default behavior.
You might be right about that. I'm not sure where that option's located though.
I don't personally use it, but it shouldn't be too hard to find. It's probably related to the current file. So if you scroll down to report settings, change the default visual interaction. Yeah.
Okay, we can give.
I don't know if it's gonna require a restart, or you might have to recreate this now that it already exists. I don't know, but
right,
worth a shot.
Yeah, let's just take a look. Oh, that worked. Very, very good. Okay.
Well, I found a use for that feature.
All right, awesome. So yeah, disregard what I was just talking about.
The only problem is now if you wanted everything to highlight, now you'd have to go and explicitly change everything else to highlight. So
not a perfect implementation, but hey, it works. Cool. Thanks, Jared.
Oh, Chantal, did you have your hand raised or?
Yes, I wanted to ask you both, or actually Jared, if there was a reason why you don't like that feature that we just turned on to not use the default functionality.
To have it cross filter instead of cross highlight. Yeah, I probably should, to be honest. I think I'm just more a creature of habit.
Gotcha.
Because just like Graham showed, there's so many times when the highlight is so small, it's like imperceivable and it makes it less useful. But I think you know why maybe I lean towards the other. When you're trying to show people the cross-hiding capability, if it's filtering, sometimes it's easy to miss the interaction, whereas the highlight, can be obvious. But
sure, thank you.
Yeah, I think that one case where that is definitely yeah, I value the highlighting more than the filtering is if the ratios maintain kind of a similar ratio across different segments, for example. I would want to see the highlighting because I'd want to see this chart. I'd want to see the amount compared to the total rather than the same exact values with just the numbers change. As Jared said, the uses are not there's not many uses where I'd prefer highlighting, but when there are, I think it's important to be able to show that there is a difference rather than click on something and nothing changes and you're not exactly sure why. But that's pretty much all I have for this demo on updates for March and February. If there are any additional questions, feel free to ask now. Otherwise, I will turn it over to Jared to take us into the main event.
All right. Anybody other questions? All right. Well, thanks, Graham. Definitely some exciting features there, and I'm pretty sure I just saw the March features come out, and there was a lot of them. So the next meeting is definitely going to be an interesting one in terms of the feature update. Okay. So and I did see we had a few new folks hop on. If anybody wanted to say hi, feel free. A few newcomers popped on recently, so welcome. All right, and the topic I'm covering today is the Power BI environment inventory, covering things like the assets that you have deployed, lineage, user assignments, and the second topic is related to usage metrics. Um, we've been doing quite a few projects related to Power BI governance. This is a list of some of the different topics that we've presented as part of project engagements to customers, covering some of the more administrative, security related, DevOps related topics that aren't something that you would usually cover as part of a like a report authoring kind of experience. But what we found is as people embrace and start using Power BI, much like the days of Access and Excel, there starts to become this sprawl of Power BI assets, and a lot of times it's the IT organization or CISO that are kind of tasked with kind of reeling things back in, providing a little bit more of a framework for users to continue to use Power BI in a way that's secure, performant, follows best practices, and whatnot. But at the same time, you don't want to lock things down too much, because one of the great benefits of Power BI is the ability to do some rapid prototyping, get tactical business benefit from the fact that it is so easy and quick to create solutions, even using just Power BI desktop. Okay, so the topics I'm covering today are kind of these small ones over here under monitoring and automation, and really focus on the topic today focuses mainly on the APIs that Microsoft makes available for Power BI that let you pull a list of assets or usage metrics. So there's kind of an all-encompassing Power BI set of APIs that are made available, and they give you access to, as I mentioned, usage data or metadata, the workspaces, the reports, the data sets, the dashboards that are kind of out there in the environment. But and there's a couple built-in tools that we'll see in a minute that let you get at some of this information, but the implementations are very limited, and in some cases the data retention for the usage data is kind of restrictive. They may only keep a certain number of days. So really one of the opportunities to really kind of take what Microsoft's made available with these APIs and build on it is to add some additional code in this kind of area here, where you can start to pull in those sets of data and build your own repository and reports on that, so you can enable IT or even businesses in terms of kind of fair chargeback for resources or licenses or whatever else may make sense for your organization. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is that inventory that we had mentioned. Okay, so let me bring up a couple sites here, and I have way too many windows open, so excuse me. Okay, so here is the first. So I mean, usually I should just bookmark this, but usually what I find myself doing is Googling Power BI REST API, and I end up on this site here. So you'll see on this overview tab, about halfway down, there's a list of all the different groups of APIs that are available. And this list continues to grow. At first, half of these weren't here, and new features become available. The ones that we're looking at first today are the ones that you might be somewhat familiar with just from using Power BI in general. The first is groups, which is kind of analogous to workspaces, if you're familiar with the Power BI service, which is a collection of the different report and data set assets that a number of users can develop against. And then kind of following that, the second being data sets that are in those groups, reports that use those data sets, and so on. So those are the three main ones that we're looking at, but there's quite a few more that we'll address, and specifically some of the admin ones that you'll understand the difference in a few minutes. So I went ahead, and this page takes forever to load, so I went ahead and loaded it already. But what I had done here is gone to the groups section and hit get groups. You'll see what I mean in a minute when I say takes forever. But the get groups Power BI REST API returns a list of workspaces that a user has access to. Okay, and it has some documentation here about how the API works. For those that don't know, a REST API is a call that you make to a URL that looks kind of like a web page URL, but instead of returning an HTML web page, it's going to return data. And there's some examples here of the JSON data it returns. A list of workspaces with these names, these IDs, and some additional information. Note that it also says you can apply some filter parameters, kind of as shown here, or say how many records you want to retrieve if you want to limit it. One of the nice things about this page is you could hit try, and what I had done already is hit try. It brings up another panel here where I was able to log in. It took a while to come up, so I'm just going to jump to that right now. So I hit try, and I signed in, and you could see here, this is what it's going to, the URL it's going to call, and I could add some of those optional parameters if I want, but when I hit run, here you go. So this is running logged in as me against our environment, and you could see comes back with Talon Reporting Dev and a couple other workspaces that exist out there in our environment. Not too useful in JSON format on this web page, but as you might imagine, if you were able to pull that data into a repository or a report even directly, you could start to see some value. So one of the things that's nice about, actually, let me mention one other thing first. Maybe two more things. If I wanted to look at data sets and see the call to get data sets, you notice I can get data sets here. The default is my workspace, which I don't want. I want maybe to pick a different workspace, not my own, that I have access to. So you'll notice there's a get data sets in group that has an additional requirement that you pass in a, oh no, I clicked the wrong one. How did I do that? Get data sets in group, where did that go? Has an additional requirement that you have to pass in the group ID. So what you could imagine here is calling get groups and getting the list of all the groups back, and then iterating over those and saying, give me all the data sets for all the groups. And you could have a full inventory of all the data sets that are out there. Worth mentioning that some of the information that comes back with the data sets are in some cases, the data sources that they actually, that are actually related to them. So now I could pull the data sets back, trace them back to, say, a specific SQL Server database, and now I know all of the data sets that are used by a particular that use a particular SQL Server database. So if I wanted to make a change to that database, I could know what the impact is. Now, Power BI does a little bit of this for you. If I go into Power BI and find a quick example here, I think this one will be good. I could go to the lineage view. Behind the scenes, Power BI kind of does this for you. You'll see here, I have a report that is traceable back to a data set that's traceable back to a data source. So all this information is here in the Power BI service, but there's not too much I could do with it here other than look at a workspace at a time. So what a lot of folks want to do is pull this data out so that they could do some of their own operations with it. So one of the easier ways to interface with REST APIs, because going to that web page and hitting try it's not the most friendly, and writing code is a little bit arduous as well, is using what's called PowerShell. So the first time you use PowerShell, it's going to open up, and you're going to try calling this command, get Power BI report. There's one of these commands for each of those REST APIs we saw. You're going to get an error saying it does not know what get Power BI report is. And this was a new laptop, which is why I ran into that issue. So what I first had to do was install the Microsoft Power BI Management PowerShell module. Just had to run this one command. And in this particular case, I know that I can trust it. Certainly check with your security team if you're allowed to do this. But then I went ahead and said yes, and it installed. So now when I run get Power BI report again, which we'll do, you'll see what the experience is there. So I'm going to open actually I already opened another PowerShell window. So we'll use this one now. So when I say, and I have this list of commands somewhere handy, hold on a second. So when I say get Power BI report, I'm actually going to get another error saying, okay, this time the issue is I haven't logged in. So it doesn't know who I am. So another nice feature that comes with PowerShell is the ability to run a login command that brings up the typical Microsoft login. Now, I'm not an administrator for our tenant, so I actually have access to another account that I'm going to use. I'm just going to bring that over here for a moment. Now, this account does have permission. Okay, so I just logged in. Okay, and you'll see I'm logged in now. So now when I say get Power BI reports again, I should get a list of still, this is all the reports that the Power BI account has access to. But one thing that I can do is say I want all the reports in the entire organization. And I just realized that was dashboards. So I could say get Power BI report, and I say scope organization. This would get me all of the reports in the entire organization. So quite a few. We use Power BI a lot. Wow, that is quite a lot. So there you have it. So Power BI REST API, a great way to kind of play with some of the APIs in a way that's programmatic. You could do a lot with PowerShell, but most folks, don't love writing, command line code to access the data. So there are other options that I'll kind of talk through. So let's see, next on the list is one other thing I should mention first I didn't cover, the admin API. So when I added that dash scope organization, that told Power BI, the Power BI API, hey, I'm an administrator. I'm kind of trusted to pull reports for the entire organization. If I didn't have permission, it would blow up and give me an error message. But what that does behind the scenes, it says, okay, the scope organization parameter was passed in. So this person is actually going to come in and call the get reports. Well, we'll just look at the get groups because apparently I don't know how the alphabet works. Get groups as admin would be a similar one. So it's a slightly different URL. It says admin here in the URL, but this would actually, if you're permitted to use it, pull back all of the groups or reports or dashboards in the organization. So when you're pulling that level of data to present to the entire, to represent the entire company, you're going to want somebody that has permission to call this admin API. What you'll know on some of these is there's limits, how many requests you could call. Notice this says 50 requests per hour, and it'll time out after a certain amount of time. So, one of the first things that folks try to do is use PowerShell or another tool to pull all this data down. But then what they run into is some of these throttling limits, like 50 requests or 30 seconds. I think there's another that limits, to how many, like I think 5,000 workspaces that can be pulled at a time. So then you have to start using these more advanced topics like the top and skip parameters to grab a certain page of data at a time. So you grab a couple hundred at a time and iterate. Yeah, here's that 5,000 limit that I mentioned. So, while, it's for small organizations, calling these APIs directly should be fine. Sometimes larger organizations need to spend a little bit more time in some of the intricacies of these APIs in order to get all of the data. And that's something that we've done for some of our customers. Okay. And there's examples of this out here. This particular example, this goes back a ways, kind of talks through what I just did and actually shows how you can do some pretty fancy things in PowerShell. PowerShell can be a little intimidating though, so there are some other options. As an example, we typically use something like Azure Data Factory, or it's now called Synapse Pipelines, to call these APIs. Some other folks use Logic Apps. So there's other options that are a little bit more, not command line based that are worth considering. Okay. So the next thing I want to mention is, so what do you do with all that data once you have it? One of the things that we've done is put it into a Power BI report, and I just have to find where. It. There we go. Okay, so we've created a pretty simple report that we could run against the data that we've extracted from our environment. Not the most elegant looking dashboard, but you kind of get the idea. You can see at a glance how many workspaces, reports, users, dashboards, data sets, and so on. The other thing that we've done is look for some problematic areas where there's I guess you'll see some poorly designed scenarios that we put at the bottom, because you might want to look for things like orphaned workspaces or workspace, meaning they have no assigned users because people have left the company or something along those lines, or workspaces with more than 25 reports. That might be an indication that there's some governance needs in terms of best practices for how much material should be in a particular workspace and shared with users. So, for each of these tiles, we have a corresponding page that you could link to that just, lists them. You could have a link to the URL, and so on. And for a particular workspace, we might enable things like going from this to see, well, let me see all of the reports in this intro to Power BI page, and you could drill through to the details there. And, as kind of showed before, you could actually, oh, looks like that. Maybe I don't have permission to that one. Click on the URL to go to those reports directly. I probably have access to this one. Oh, I don't have permission here either. All right, well, I think you kind of get the idea based on the URL link. So what we've done is create an inventory of all the workspaces, reports, data sets. The data sources, this isn't actually an interesting one because, like we mentioned before, you might want to look for, one of these is actually a good example. I thought, oh, data sets with local data sources. So anything that's pointing to a file on an individual's machine. I mean, these ones we know because we do a lot of dashboard and a day events. So that would explain why this is a local file. But you don't want people pointing to files on their machines because if their machine crashes, then you lose the ability to refresh that data set. So there's quite a few things that you can actually inspect through these APIs, with those as a few examples. Anybody have any questions about pulling that data in, or then what kind of reporting you could enable from it? Okay, I'll keep going then. So one other thing that I did want to share. There's a gentleman out there. I forget. I don't know what his actual name is. Jordan, that has created a connector, his own connector that lets Power BI Desktop connect to those APIs directly, which is kind of convenient. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. However, just major disclaimer, he even says in here that this may perform poorly and it's experimental, and technically you're running code that you may not have looked at. So I'd say use caution here because it does require you to change a few settings in order to be able to use this. And honestly, this is something we decided not to use with our customers, but it gives you a pretty good idea of what some of the data sets look like. So I've installed that connector. Doing so involves throwing the connector file in under your documents, Power BI Desktop custom connector location, and turning off one of the security features in Power BI Desktop, which is probably ill-advised. So just beware. But one thing that is kind of nice is when I, from Power BI Desktop, go into Power Platform, you can see his Power BI API connector here. And it actually warns me again that maybe I shouldn't do this. But he's gone ahead and built a connector that pulls in a lot of that stuff for you. So if I wanted to see all of the actual workspaces, just like that API, it pulls those same things in, and I could connect to this directly using Power BI Desktop. It is possible in Power BI Desktop to call REST APIs directly. It's challenging in a number of different ways, so I usually don't suggest it. And one of the main reasons is now that data is kind of locked into Power BI, and sure, you can have multiple reports off one Power BI data set that has that information, but in general, I like, whenever possible, to first pull the data from like a third-party API or a database and store it in a modern data platform like a Synapse-based data warehouse or data lake, and then have Power BI connect to that. There's a number of reasons why that's beneficial, but one of the main ones is that maybe I don't want to pull the entire data set each time like Power BI is typically used to do. I might want to pull incremental changes. I might want to keep history of changes over time. And Power BI itself, isn't really meant for that. That's where a data warehouse would be a better option. So that's usually what we do. We use Synapse pipelines, hit that API, and drop the data in a data lake and have Power BI connect to that. So that's what we did for the other report I just showed. And which page again? But that's usually our approach. And we have, code already that kind of helps facilitate that. So I'm happy to have some more conversations with folks if that's something you're interested in. Okay, so that covers back to the presentation real quick. That covers the inventory and lineage. I guess one other thing I should add on this point, Microsoft also has a tool called Purview, which will connect to your Power BI environment and pull in much of that same information and show you that same data lineage you saw in Power BI in a very visual form. It lets you, add some documentation, such as who owns the report, etc. But there is a cost to Purview. So I would say look into that. And decide, does it make sense to use a tool like Purview, which can not just document your Power BI environment, but your entire data estate, including sources, or does it make sense for your particular governance need, maybe to do something with the API directly? All right, so the next topic is the audit and usage metrics. Before I dive into this, I'll take one more second to see if anybody has any questions. I think I don't see any in the chat either. Okay. All right, so anybody ever use the Power BI usage metrics reports that kind of come built in? Okay, let me show you what that looks like. I haven't looked at this report in a while, which is a very nice thing. Seems like the numbers have been declining in terms of COVID cases, but if your organization has this feature turned on, what you should be able to do right from a report is to open up usage metrics. And this will bring up a report. Notice there's a new look and feel that's enabled by default now. I don't use this report too often, so not the most compelling usage data here, but what you'll see is you get some limited usage metrics about how many times this report's been viewed by how many unique users, and then you get a little bit more detail on who those folks are, etc. A little bit of information about the performance, how long it takes to render the reports. And actually, this is new. I hadn't seen this one yet, but a list of reports in this workspace and the metrics associated with each, which is kind of nice. And they got a new fact page too. There you go. They define what a view is. So, but this is limited. One of the reasons this is limited is these metrics only go back 30 days. I think it's 30. It used to be 90, and then they changed it. And you don't have as much control over the data set here as you do with those APIs. There's a lot more information I might be interested in seeing that I can't see here. So there's another option to see usage metrics that comes out of the box. And if you are an admin, you could go to the admin portal and click on usage metrics. and it'll show some very high level usage metrics that are almost unusable. And there's not much you could do with this report other than look at this view, so not too helpful here. The next thing you could do is go to audit logs and open the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, where you can look at the Office 365 unified audit log. So notice now I'm not in Power BI anymore. I'm in, Microsoft.com, which, so, this feature can be used for more than just Power BI. You can see, if I choose the activities, you'll see they changes. Wow, this is going to be really fun. So you can see SharePoint in here, a whole bunch of Microsoft Forms, Dynamics. So all types of activities. So I could search for Power BI specifically, I hope, and see. There's, I think, like 70 different Power BI metrics that could be captured as well. So someone creates a deployment pipeline, someone publishes a report, someone adds a user to a workspace, took over a workspace. So all of these types of activities you can pick and say search. You have to give it a range. Here too, it only stores that 30 days of data. I doubt that the random things I just picked are going to yield anything. But yeah, it doesn't look like that combination I picked had any data, but once you do, you could export this as well. Okay, so not great, and it only stores 90 days. So the other option is to use the API to connect to the usage metrics data. So if I go back to that API page, too many windows open still. I forget where the usage metrics fall. Is it under admin? Hold on. I think it's called events. Yeah, get activity events. So this get activity events API will pull that same information. This is very limited. You have to give it a start time and an end time. It's, again, querying that data that's only there for, I think, I can't remember if it's 30 or 90 days. So if you want to kind of build these usage metrics up and show kind of trends over time, you have to call this API periodically, extract the data, throw it in a data lake, and preserve it on your own. And then you could report against that here. But those are all the events that you saw are what comes back. So, this person viewed a report, as an example, with that API. So I have another report that shows don't know. This was it. Yeah. So this was just a simple report we threw together. Usually we don't, report on usage metrics in Power BI, but this reports on data that is pulled from that API, written to the data lake, and you could see that you have the ability to look at time, slice by workspace, type of operation, much like we could in the unified audit log, but now we have more flexibility with activity over time. There's one other thing that I wanted to show, and I think it's in the tenant settings again. So there's a preview feature. Microsoft is obviously, always evolving Power BI and adding more capabilities. So there's a preview feature that they have where not only can Power BI capture audit information and make usage available to content creators, but now they have an option to log that data into Azure Log Analytics. If I enable this, all those same activities will write to Log Analytics. And then on the Azure cloud side, I have an option to control, how long I want to retain them. I could search them there. There becomes a lot more powerful type operations that I could do against that log data. So this just came out, so I think probably one of the next 2 meetings will delve deeper into this topic, show how this activity data can be written to Log Analytics, and then you could query it from there. Now, Log Analytics also has an associated cost with it, depending on how much data you're saving and the volume of it for how long. But it's definitely going to be a little bit more seamless experience. And you could also query the log analytics data directly and write to your data lake. Synapse actually has a new feature called Data Explorer that's going to allow you to query this log analytics data, and then you could write it to a data warehouse or a data lake for analysis. That feature is in preview, and I haven't actually seen it working in our environment yet, but I imagine the next month or 2 it will, and it'll be something that we cover. Once you enable it here for the organization, then what you have to do is go to a particular workspace, and no, that's not what I wanted to do. Why does that not have the option here? All right, hold on, let me try it. I might have to be an administrator. Go to workspace. Use this one. Click on settings, Azure connection. No. All right, well, I got to find out why I'm not seeing that. I swear I had it open in another window today. There's 3 options now. Connecting to your data flows to a data lake directly, as you see here, but there should be another one that says write data to log analytics. Anybody on the call know why I'm not seeing that now? I might click around to a few different. Make sure I'm a admin. Oops. All right, well, I'm not sure why it's not showing up. I swear to God, it was about 15 minutes before I started presenting, but I'll maybe find out why in the next couple minutes while people are talking or asking questions, and I'll come back to it. But that's pretty much what I had to cover. Does anybody have any questions on calling the API for the usage metrics or storing that data? All right. Any other topics anybody wanted to bring up or questions folks have? All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing because I know as soon as I do that, I'm going to figure out why the that setting wasn't there. Good question. Chantal, I don't think you need premium for log analytics, but we do have one premium workspace. So, I swear it wasn't this one I was looking at before, but here you go. So we do have one premium Talon embedded. You notice it's premium because it has a little diamond here. When I go to settings and Azure connection, I have log analytics. So if I turned on log analytics as the tenant setting, then I do have the option here to enable it, and it will start writing to log analytics. But since there's a cost associated with that, that's why they want the admins to turn it on first. So now I have to find out, is it a premium setting, and where was I looking before? Because I don't remember seeing that. Maybe that's it. All right. Man, this is really going to bother me. All right. Anybody, any other questions?
No, that was a lot of good stuff there.
Yep. No. Thanks, Javier. All right. Well, I see a few folks are trickling out, so I guess we can wrap it up unless anybody has any other questions.